Thanks, Vicki, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're at in the country. I see people calling in from New Jersey, Paulette from New Jersey, Violet from Caltag, Alaska. So welcome, everyone. My name is Alexis Contreras. I'm the research assistant here at NICWA. And also joining me today for this webinar is Julie Taylor, from Director of Children and Family Services for the Umatilla Tribe, and Lindsay Pacina, youth member of the Umatilla Youth Leadership Circle. And I wanted to just go ahead and invite them to just introduce themselves. Julie and Lindsay. You may have to unmute yourself at the bottom. And I believe they're on, but I'll just go ahead and get started. I think they are just kind of logging in, and we can get started, and they're going to join and be able to share along the way throughout this webinar. So this webinar is hosted by NICWA in partnership with the National PA Network for Children's Behavioral Health. That's through the University of Maryland. And our objectives today are really to go through, we're going to have an overview of the community asset mapping process. As you saw, this webinar was titled Part 2. So last year we did a webinar on community asset mapping and kind of the process, the data collection methods, what it's used for. And so today we're really going to do just kind of a short overview as for people who maybe weren't on that first webinar, or also as a refresher since it has been about a year. And then we're going to go through the Community Asset Mapping Toolkit. And then where we're going to spend most of our time is on the youth-led process that took place at the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. And then also just along the way, we'll kind of talk about some of the lessons learned as technical assistance providers. So first, what is community asset mapping? Community asset mapping is really an activity that community organizers use when they first want to focus their advocacy around a certain issue or topic in their community. It uses a strengths-based approach to map resources in a community. And it can really be used to kind of build support for policy initiatives, to develop programming that's addressing a community need. So really, instead of being focused on deficits, it really focuses on the strengths of a community and strengths that are defined and identified by community members. So community asset mapping is really an exercise that encourages community participation. Really, anyone can be involved, individuals, families, organizations, tribal leaders, youth. It really is to be a holistic process. It takes a lot of the participation, and people can participate along the way in different pieces of that. And so it really captures all of the resources in a community, and so that's why we want everyone to be or as many people as possible to be involved along the process. And so again, identifying, collecting, and analyzing those assets that are identified by the community. So the Community Asset Mapping Toolkit was really was created as part of the First Kids First partnership between NICWA the National Congress of American Indians, the National Indian Health Board, and the National Indian Education Association. And it was created for tribal communities to collect community-based data to help Native youth thrive. So it is a community asset mapping is kind of a Western concept that came out around the 90s, and we are kind of offering with this toolkit a culturally adapted structure for using community asset mapping. And we used the relational worldview model to adapt it for use in Indigenous communities. And it is also created so that many different people can use it. So depending, like various levels of knowledge or experience around community asset mapping. So communities can use this for a range of community development reasons that could be centered around Native youth well-being. So that might be identifying needs in a community. It could be improving services to youth. It could be for developing strategic plans. And it could even be used to satisfy grant requests, funding requests. So at the Umatilla Tribe, they participated with us, NICWA, and the First Kids First partners on a pilot project. So they were kind of the first ones to try out this toolkit that was created. And it was a youth-led process. The youth were really involved from the very beginning, from the first steps of the process, and the decision to actually engage in this process, and throughout the entire way they led the process. So one thing that's important is really having those supportive adults that are also involved along the way. And at Umatilla, they definitely had that in Julie Taylor, who is with us on this webinar today, as kind of the person that helped support them in convening their group, in supporting their process, and being there to answer questions, to help them along the way, to help them to get the support of the tribal council as well. And so in the initial planning, NICWA, or so myself and my colleague David Simmons, we went out to the Umatilla Tribe, which is NICWA is located in Portland, Oregon, and so Umatilla is just down the road from us. It's a 3-hour drive and a 30-minute plane ride. And so we went down to Umatilla to kind of present what the project was about, and what that might look like, what their participation would look like, what we could offer as trainers and technical assistance providers to the Youth Leadership Circle or Council. And so we went out to present to them, and then they had lots of great questions for us as well. And they, as a group, voted to participate in this process. So the Youth Leadership Council at Umatilla has a big age range of youth. And I'm wondering if, Lindsay, if you can unmute yourself, you have to click on the screen, and then at the bottom of the screen is mute. Lindsay, did you want to say a little bit about the makeup of your group?
We had to call in on the phone because we're having IT work on our the PowerPoint and on the computer here, so hopefully he'll get it fixed. But Lindsay's right here.
And we can hear you.
Can you hear it? Okay, can you
I
repeat
can hear you and I can see you. Yeah, so in this slide, we were just kind of talking about the Youth Leadership Council and the makeup and kind of who's on, how many people are in the group, what the group kind of looks like, and a little bit about what you guys do there. Lindsay, did you want to share anything about that?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Lindsay Lucena Little Sky. I'm 15 years old and I'm a junior in high school. And I'm the chairwoman for the youth council. And every year we have a new election, so that means that there's youth.
Oh, you muted. It was muted somehow. We can't hear you. We can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah, we have a new election every year, so that means new people are coming in, and then the ones who go out of age range are going out, but they can still participate and come to the meetings. And we meet like every Sunday, but since COVID, we've been meeting on Zoom. And yeah, the age range from 15 to 17, that's like 8th grade to seniors.
Great. Thank you. So thank you, Lindsay. So like she was saying, they did have a change. They had the new election cycle from the time that we came to, from the time that they voted to participate in the project, and then the time until the time that they got trained in the community asset mapping toolkit, there was a change in the election cycle. So they had a new, some of the returning members come on, and then also there were some new members that joined as well. And so, like Lindsay was saying, some people kind of aged out, or they were having, maybe in their senior year of high school, so they had some like busy years, and so they stepped down, and so new students or new members came in. And for NICWA, we always held we always kind of joined in and did our TA visits with on the same day that they have their regular youth leadership council meetings on Sundays. And so we came out to come and train. So the first visit that we did with them was training them on the community asset mapping process and on the toolkit. And so we came out and had I think we had about 3 hours with the group to kind of train on the process and what that looks like. We did an amazing amount of work during that time as well in this kind of brainstorming on topics that they might be interested in assets in their community, as well as maybe people in their community that would be good people to identify to talk to about assets in their community. And then we also provided some tools along with the toolkit. Some of the things we also did were provide templates for work plans and that sort of thing, so that they could to help them in kind of thinking about steps to take and timeline and that sort of thing. So some of the notes that we had as TA providers was that really the hands-on training and TA was needed on the tools and the templates. So I think in some ways you kind of envision a process and what it might look like, and then you have to be really flexible in changing that process to where the community is at. And so we found that like maybe just handing them a template of a work plan is not the best way to to help, but actually kind of sitting down and kind of just having a discussion about what next steps look like, about timelines, helping to set some dates was a much better way to work with the youth leadership circle than just handing out a template and saying, here you go. And then flexibility with deadlines. This is also, the youth leadership was doing most of this work on their own time. And so, yes, we were doing our TA visits during their regular meetings on Sundays, but also outside of that, when they were doing their collection and their data, they had to do that on their own time. So we had to be flexible with the deadlines because they have lots of other things going on: school, sports, family responsibilities, community responsibilities. And so just having that flexibility is really important when working with youth, especially when we're asking a lot of them to go out and gather all this information in their community. So actually, I just wanted to stop real quick and just say that if you have any questions, you're welcome to just put them in the chat box. Vicki is going to be monitoring that, and she can read them out. So please feel free to ask any questions as we go along. And so in that first visit, when we did the training, like I said, there was a lot of work that was done there, and really they did a lot of focusing on focusing of the topics that they wanted to cover. And so Lindsay, I was going to ask if you wanted to talk about that process of the brainstorming and how you led that process actually in narrowing down the focus, and then what those topics were that you guys chose. And you're on mute. Oh, it muted again. There we go.
Now?
Yes, we can hear you.
So we would sit on a table, and then we listed like I guess issues that we wanted to resolve in the community, and there was things like education, alcohol prevention, and we listed them all, and we came up with about, at least I could say, it filled up the whole board, and we narrowed it down to about 5, and then we narrowed it down to about 3, and the 3 we chose were substance abuse prevention, promoting culture and language, and suicide prevention. And so what we did with that is when we chose our 3 topics, like the focuses, we came up with a list of people, like the leaders in our community, so that we could interview them about how they feel about that focus, the subject. And that's when we had to go on our own time and interview those people, the leaders that we came up with, because we also made a list of people who we think are leaders in the community, and so you would choose from that list on who you wanted to interview with. And you could go with a group of people, because when we split into these groups of the culture and language and suicide prevention, if you were more with the culture and language, then like it'd be a group of 5 in each one, and then those people either on their own or in the group can go interview those people. And so we came up with questions on each one, about 5 each. Some of them were different and some of them were the same, and then we selected their answers at the end.
Great, thank you. And so really, these were the topics that they felt like were really important, and the group decided to narrow down on. And like Lindsay said, they broke up into groups based on what what they wanted to focus on. And then the purpose really is kind of to understand all of the strengths that their community has around each of those topics, and then to see, maybe if there were some gaps that were there, or something that was missing, or and then really to just provide that good information to support their initiatives that the youth council is coming up with. So like Lindsay said, they identified a list of community members that they wanted to do interviews with. And then they also had to determine their data collection methods. So in the toolkit, it outlines several ways of how that can be done. Some of those ways we practiced as a group. One of those ways was bingo as a data collection method. And we, with the group, we had brought, of course, you have to have prizes when you play bingo. So we brought prizes and played bingo, and we used it as just, we had a question, what is an asset in your community? And there's a list of numbers, and people wrote down the assets in their communities on each of the numbers. You turn in the numbers, and then you use those numbers for the bingo callers. So we got to try out several different data collection methods while we were doing the training. And ultimately, the group decided that some of the things that how they wanted to collect the data was to do interviews, individual interviews. And so they had made this huge list of people in the community that they thought would have some insight or have different opinions and different information that they could gather. And they did interviews. Some were video interviews, some were audio, and they all kind of had, Lindsay, was it like 3 or 2 or 3 people each that you guys interviewed? And if you want to talk a little bit more about maybe the people that you interviewed. And you're on mute.
Yeah, I was in a group of 3, and I was in the promoting culture and language group, and the questions we asked were, how do you express culture, how do we get youth involved in culture and language, and what distracts you from the other culture and language, stay connected to their culture, and what has helped you stay connected to more recent. We all came up with these questions ourselves, and I asked a language teacher, because they're obviously teaching language and we teach, so they're so I asked him about how he feels, and answered the question, how did he express culture, shares it, and how do we get you involved in culture and language, as the world is more into technology now, that we have to embrace technology with our we have to embrace technology with the learning aspects of language or culture. So because what distracts you from learning their culture and language, obviously technology, and and elders and your peers. Yeah, and the audio recorded that, so that was able to share to everybody else. The other person in my group, she interviewed her other leader on our list, his name is Robbie Hill, and I don't remember what he said, but we specifically the group played their audio or their video, what they had written down. We would put it together and make a summary, I guess, of which one of everyone's answers, and then listen next, like suicide prevention. It has history. And yeah, we just make summaries of them.
Great. Thank you. I was going to ask Julie if you wanted to share a little bit about what you saw as just kind of a supporter in when they were doing their interviews and things that maybe they found out, and just if you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so when they gathered in their groups, you know, they like she said, they came up with the questions, which was a good, you know, process for them to learn, you know, to get questions, to formulate them, and then gather, you know, the data, because that's what they were trying to learn, is how to gather data, how to do the interview questions. They went out in the community, like you said, they made the list. They identified who they thought would make you know, an impact with each of them in each of their areas. So like with the culture and language, and they were able to identify assets with that as well, because you know, the people are assets, but also like the Longhouse, you know, that's where they're going to reach out to. Or if it was with suicide prevention, it would be our Yellow Hot Clinic, you know, staff in there with behavioral health or mental health. Or if it was, you know, our A&D program, we'd, you know, reach out to Yellow Hawk for those that were in recovery, or it could have been, you know, some of their family members as well. And those were, you know, difficult questions and difficult answers, and for them to come back and share that with each other was very, you know, it was very emotional and difficult for all of them, you know, to come back to share with the group as far as like what their whether their peers were hearing it, or whether it was a peer that was, you know, actually in recovery, or, you know, had issues with A&D, or even suicide prevention. So we made sure that they had, you know, connections after they had these discussions too, because, you know, because it could get pretty difficult in the discussions as well, you know, with the trauma that families do have, and siblings that they do see, because they do have siblings in their groups as well. But the interviews were great. They did good on the videoing, the audio. They shared. They used their technology, which was good. You know, they wrote out their stories and their summaries and shared it with each other each time we came back. And then every time NICWA came, you know, we were able to be prepared and have the summary ready so that we could collect the data.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And yeah, that's so important too. The just making sure that they have those connections afterwards. That's really important point. Those topics that they had do have a lot of trauma that could be associated with them, even secondary trauma as well. So yeah, I appreciate that they have you, Julie, as a supportive adult that's kind of thinking about those things and making sure that they're going through this process in a good way. Vicki, do we have a question in the chat?
Yes, Megan asks, was the focusing process completely youth leadership council led? Were those facilitating the process trained in facilitation skills or how to choose the areas of focus? If so, what did that look like?
Yeah, good question. So I can start, and then Lindsay and Julie, feel free to add. So the focusing process was completely Youth Leadership Council led. They came up with all of those topics on their own. They had a big whiteboard where they just kind of threw out, it was just like a brainstorming activity where they threw out lots of ideas about things that they wanted to focus on. And then once they had this really kind of huge list, narrowing that down, actually Lindsay came up with, I think it was Lindsay who came up with the idea of how to kind of narrow down that focus. And then as for the facilitating, if they had facilitation skills, they actually, I know that their group has done some facilitating training, not with NICLA, but I think with other groups. And maybe you guys can, Julie and Lindsay, you can jump in here and talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it was youth-led because we would sit down and we'd brainstorm off of each other of different topics that we wanted to do, and then when we were having to come down, we just like point at each topic, and someone would raise their hand at the end to see which topic has the most like votes, I would say, and we'd go off those three, and then we would ask again if everybody was sure, just to make sure everybody was on the right page. And that's how we did that process.
Great. Julie, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, as far as like facilitation skills, I mean, like I said, we work with the kids quite a bit with Northwest, what was it, Northwest,
Portland area Indian Board?
Yeah, and then the wellness as well. But we also have trainers here that facilitation within the tribe, and so they have been through quite a bit of facilitation, and they, like I said, they do a lot of service for the tribe as far as going to do presentations. So we try to work on that every time with their presentations that they have to provide, whether it be through general counsel or our board of trustees, and then also with each other. They work on it every Sunday of introductions and things like that. So, but some of them have been a part of Northwest Health Board doing focus groups, so they're kind of familiar with that, as well as Yellow Hawk. They do a lot of focus groups.
Thank you. So they really are, they're doing a lot out there. Their youth leadership circle is really awesome. So for these kind of the technical assistance notes, we had more of our TA visits were more like work sessions. So where we would come together, we had, after we had the initial came out for the initial training, we came back regularly and joined one of their groups and did kind of it was a time for us to kind of get together, and like they said, they were ready to just kind of work and get some stuff done. So really out of those visits came a lot of work that they did. They put in a lot of work to come up with all these lists and lots of discussion around assets and interviews and asking those questions. So really it was kind of helping them to kind of think about what they wanted that process to look like. So community asset mapping in other areas might look different, but with their process, what does that look like? And then, so lots of discussions during those work sessions, those where they created all of those interview questions that they wanted to ask. And like Lindsay said, there were several interview questions that were the same for each group. And then each group did have a couple questions that were specific to the topic that they wanted to focus on. So the collection of assets and analysis so the Youth Leadership Circle, so they did come back in one of those kind of work sessions and were able to share with the entire group what they had found. So they got to either share the audio, maybe the audio clip or the video clip of their interview that they conducted, and then also get to share some insights from that. So they were able to share just like what was something that stood out to them, maybe something new that they learned during their process. And then as a group, kind of, again, doing those during those work sessions, compiling and recording all of those assets that they collected, and then kind of after each group had shared, and each person got to share, discussing kind of what the themes were that they saw. So if there were things that they saw that were surprising to them, or maybe there were things that weren't surprising, and or things that stood out to them as like maybe gaps in service. So then lastly, they kind of had to decide how they wanted to map out those assets. So they had a big, huge list, and one of the ways that they really were interested in is kind of mapping them onto a Google map. So Google Maps has a way that you can, or sorry, not Google Maps, but Google My Maps has a way where you can map assets in your community. So it's like literally a map of your community, and then you can use little icons to kind of to map where there's assets. You can have comment bubbles, you can embed videos and links. And so they actually had like a Google representative come out and train so that they could begin to do some of that mapping on their My Map. And so do you guys want to talk a little bit more about that training and how that went? You're on mute.
So what I remember is when we got there, we went to Google Maps or My Maps, and he showed us how to get to our location, our community, and we talked about the places that helped our assets or our topics, and so that was like places like the government center or the Longhouse or the Yellow Hawk, or even Mission Market. And we could put, like she said, comment bubbles, and that's where we would share about the topics that relate to the building, or even the field down there. So then that's when basically we just, like you said, we mapped it, we learned how to map it, and we learned how to use the video. And so some of us, I think we put our interview video in there, or like in the comment section we put the answers to the interview, or like how we felt about the building and how it helps to our topic and how it is an asset to the community, and then we would share it.
Great. And then that's so important to point out is that what Lindsay was saying, like, you know, their Longhouse or your Yellow Hawk building, but also a field. Like the field is an asset in their community because they use that for, you know, a community space or for sports or whatever it may be. And Mission Market, because that's a place where that's also an asset because they, you know, they get food there, or you meet up with people there, or you have interactions with your community there. So things, community asset mapping is really about kind of really mapping all of the assets and strengths in the community. And so it might be things that you might not think of as in your community, but it's really based on what the community identifies as an asset or a strength in their community. So after you have all this information, kind of want to do some thinking about how you want to present that information, who you want to present that information to, excuse me, and you know, what's the purpose behind presenting. Convention in Spokane, Washington. So Lindsay and Julie, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what those presentations were like. Oh, you're on mute.
So with the Youth Leadership Council, you know, we provide, like when we went to AT&I, you know, AT&I is kind of a hard place to get on a schedule there. They give us like 3 to 5 minutes, which is good, but thankfully we were able to get on the agenda. We have to have contacts, you know, with our tribal council to get on the AT&I agenda. So we were able to get on the agenda and present a resolution, but before they did that, they meet with a youth group there that we have a AT&I youth group. So we gathered all the youth together and we meet for like 2 days there, and they decided they wanted to do a resolution. So they came up with a resolution, and we can share that at some point later to those that have interest in it. And they sat down and got in focus groups again and identified areas that they wanted to share with leaders all over the Northwest, pretty much. So then they came up with a written resolution, you know, whether it be climate change, whether it be fish, you know, whether it be A&D issues, suicide, language. So they presented that, and we had the youth, Lindsay and a few of them prepped them ready to go, and they presented it to AT&I. And they read the resolution. It probably wasn't the appropriate time, but that was during our time that we had, and that was the thing that we wanted to make sure that the leaders heard. So they presented it, and right there from the floor, all the leadership said, we would like to pass this resolution, you know, and at that time it was that somebody said, no, this is not the time, and the leaders stood up and said, yes, this is the time. So the youth were supported at that time. They passed the resolution on the floor, which was something that the kids learned about as well, and they're like wondering what's going on. And so it was powerful for all the leaders to support the kids, and that's what they said. We're here to support the youth. They're speaking, so we are going to support the resolution. So they did get a resolution passed, and then they went to the Northwest, the NICWA, the Northwest Child Welfare Association Board of Directors, and gave their presentation. We had 3 of them go and presented on the culture, language, suicide, and A&D, and they did the presentation as well. And some of them, like with ICWA, we had one, you know, girl that she presented. She wasn't really for ICWA, only because, you know, she had a different, kind of a different view on it. And so, you know, the NICWA board was happy that she had another view, even though she was Native and was in a, you know, non-Native placement. So she wanted to voice her concern with that. So that was pretty good. And like I said, they present it to our tribal council, our general council, and we also have to go to commission and committees. So they have to present to Law and Order Committee, the Health Commission, and the Education Committee. So they have to go to those committees as well to get support, and then they bring it to our leadership, and then they have to talk to the leadership themselves and get questions and answers from them. They also have a resolution for priorities, and so that's where the asset mapping came in, is what are their priorities? So just like the Board of Trustees or your Youth Tribal Council, they have priorities every year or every 2 years. So they have to identify what is their priorities they're going to work on for the year. So they have identified that, and they went through General Council and got that passed. And then now they're, since the COVID, were kind of on hold, but they got to go back to the Board of Trustees to get their priorities voted on and get the support from the Tribal Council. So they do learn all of that through tribal government, and that's what we're trying to teach them about the treaty, about tribal governance, what are the processes, so they learn that as well as they're going as leaders, as young leaders, and what is it to sit in a meeting, whether it be general council with your parents 18 and over, or what is it to sit as a Board of Trustees member.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay. So so once they did all of that work, they had a lot of work in just presenting their findings and really, like Julie was saying, the community asset mapping really helped to inform their priorities that they are bringing to tribal council. So it's just one more tool that they have to be able to use and in their communities. And so this picture is from APNI, which is the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians. So it's a room full of tribal leaders in the convention that was in Spokane, Washington, the mid-year in 2019, where they had passed that resolution right there on the floor of the General Assembly. And so this was, their resolution was titled, Stand Up for Our Youth Wishes and Future Generations. And so that was it was a really powerful moment, and it was amazing to get to be there and to see them present up on stage. And I think, like you said, Julie, I think they only usually give you 3 to 5 minutes to present. But the youth, I think, got a little bit more than that time and was able to present. They showed a video that they had produced, and then also had that resolution passed right there on the floor. So actually, one other thing that they participated in was a radio program, and the Youth Leadership Council members, they had a radio, their own radio station at the Umatilla Tribe, and so they broadcast kind of like their experience with community asset mapping and a little bit about their process and what they found on that radio program. We'll have to see if we can get that link. Maybe it's possible that we can share that. We weren't able to share it today because it was down. But do you want to mention, Lindsay, you were one of the people that were interviewed for that radio program. Do you want to do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so it was only 2 at a time for a language, and so we shared different answers we got, who we talked to, what was the community asset mapping, how did we do it, basically the steps we took in order to have an outcome. So we talked about basically what we're talking about right now, just going through everything and hearing everybody's different answers through interviews, because it was I interviewed a younger person and a girl in my group interviewed an elder, so there was completely different answers between the two. So we talked about the diversity through the answers and basically our future plans and what we went through.
And so we have about 6 minutes left, and so we just wanted to open it up now if people had questions or if there's any comments. And then I just wanted to ask Julie if you wanted to share anything more while we're waiting for people to type in the chat, just about how the process was for you as kind of that support, in that role of supportive adult.
Yeah, like I said, the kids, we've been working on this. We've had the youth council for about 5 years. And like I said, we only had high school at the beginning of the couple years. And then we finally said, okay, I think we need to go to 6th grade. So we started with 6th grade to 8th grade. So if anybody's interested in looking at some of our work that we've done with the community asset mapping, or, you know, with our resolutions that have been passed, or sharing the resolution on how to get a youth council started, we're more than willing to help. We've worked with Cow Creek, we worked with Klamath, we've worked just recently with Grand Ronde, and now Warm Springs. So we've shared our resolutions with others so that they can get started. And it may start with a small group. We told them you might have to start with, like we did, we had youth summits, and that would be on like a Saturday and Sunday. And we'd have maybe 50, 60 kids show up, and then we'd ask them, okay, who wants to be on a youth council? And then they would nominate each other, and then we'd have an election, and they'd have to do speeches and be prepared for it, and have a ballot, and go through like an election like leaders do, and make sure that they know the process. And they do an awesome job when they're presenting and doing their speeches, and they learn about, you know, public speaking and facilitation, and, you know, what it is to be in a meeting, and also your commitment, because they're very committed, especially when they come on Sundays. But that was the only day because, you know, they're so busy with schools and sports. So yeah, being an advisor or assisting them, supporting them, you have to be really consistent and have to be committed, because that's what they want. They want consistency and commitment. So they need that leadership to help them throughout, you know, to support them. So thankfully, NICWA was there to also to provide this facilitation, and that helped, you know, guide us as well, to have some outside entity come in to, you know, support us, especially a national, you know, committee, is like even Northwest Health Board. We have Lindsay serves on that committee now. She talks about suicide prevention. So we do a lot of outreach too, and we sent them to Washington, D.C. Like we said, AT&I, we're part of the youth committee there. We sent them to NCAI. So they do different things, and some of them never flown before, so they do ride, you know, travel. So it's awesome to have a youth council and be supportive of them.
Yeah, the youth council is really good. Go ahead, Julie.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I just said we're more than willing to help wherever we can to help other youth, you know, help within their communities, because they all have the same issues going on. So when they were doing their asset mapping, I thought they would pick maybe some of the funner stuff, you know, like education, sports, things like that, but it always went back to A&D, it went back to suicide prevention, and it went back to culture and language, because that's, you know, what's meaningful to them, or that's what's happening, you know, within their families. So we had to prioritize that to get services or get resources for their families or their siblings. So that's what they were working on, is trying to beef up, you know, the programs, or to know what is the prevention programs or education programs that could help them, you know, through school. So.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Julie, and thank you for just being so willing to, I know, to help other communities in their process. And the Youth Leadership Circle, it was great getting to work with them. We always got to go out there and join for lunch, so we'd have like Subway sandwiches or pizza or something, and we always got to go out for lunch and just to kind of work with them and see everything that they were doing was just really amazing. Like some weeks they're like, oh no, we can't do that week. We're going down to the Capitol, down to Salem to the Capitol to go present testimony or what, you know, go sit on this council or this committee. And so they're really busy and doing a lot of great work out there. And I know we are just about out of time. I don't know if there's any questions, but it is kind of right at the hour. But I just really wanted to thank Julie and Lindsay for joining today and really getting to share their experience with this process. Vicki, do you have was there any questions?
And then sorry for the technology. So we're trying to work on that.
We're glad that you're able to join.
Yeah.
Well, I see that there are a couple comments, so I'll let thank you so much for the inspiring presentation. And then Violet says, thank you, that is awesome work, and if I'm interested in learning more about the processes that brought them all to this point, great job. And Corey says, awesome job, Julie, you're doing such great work for the youth in your community.
Thank you again for involving us, Alexis, and we appreciate NICWA and all the support that we get from NICWA.
Yeah, thanks. We really value our